big arrow comes in. Out, there are two things that go out. There's the crop removal, and the remainder over the long haul. I mean, there's some temporary, there are annual buildups and ups and downs, but over the long haul, the rest goes down the tubes. That's it.
Eventually.
That's right. You don't have to know the processes. And as long as you're not worried about daily accounting or monthly accounting, and you start looking at this thing at a multiple year basis, all of the internal workings even out. And you're going to get a whole lot closer. Sometimes you get closer by looking at the big picture than all the details. So what we're saying is these top two arrows are the key, right there. What do you put on? How much do you remove? So we have this list of things that we recommend. First of all, and these are explained again in the report, we strongly support the establishment of coalitions as an intermediate body between board staff and farmers. Again, any of these things we can address. The second, this is a big one here, is the adoption of this ratio. That means basically applied over removed. This ratio can't be 1, by the way. But it's a question of essentially, if you put on 3 times as much as you remove, it might indicate a slight problem, you know? How's that? Closer to 1 looks a little better, it looks better. Now, we don't know how good you can even get. I mean, that's where we are right now. But that's the start of it here, because that is what directly impacts groundwater, right there. And we say, you know, by the way, just looking at nitrate levels in groundwater doesn't tell you who should be looked at and who shouldn't, because maybe the problem is coming down. Maybe it's on its way. So this is a thing that belongs to everybody. In other words, all farming operations. The next one is huge here, and this, from the comments we've got, is not being, it has not been understood too well, that there would be a very strong, comprehensive, and sustained educational and outreach program. This is not just a few short courses, and it requires different materials and so on for different audiences. And we're talking about certification for people who make plans, which I'll get to in a minute. And that's a key component. Remember, there's a social aspect to this. Next one is we think that you can break up farms and fields into similar management units that have similar soils, irrigation methods, the same crop, you know, same fertilizer techniques. In other words, you know, what do you do with 100 acres of 1 acre produce fields, you know, that kind of question. Well, you lump them, you know, is what you do. And, but there should be nitrogen and water management plans. And why water? Because that's how the nitrogen moves. I mean, it doesn't get down below unless it goes with water. And then a reporting. Keep in mind, the management plan would not be reported, but it would have to be implemented and created. And we're saying they have to be customized and they have to be good. But the reporting is crop type, acreage, total nitrogen applied, total nitrogen removed, and a location. And then trend monitoring of groundwater to track conditions over multiple years, targeted research, and then the emphasis that individual years values are not important, it's long-term trends. In other words, we're not envisioning a quick fix for this. We're envisioning a really good program that will go on for a long time. There is no quick fix for this. So grower coalitions, I mentioned that. They've been valuable in Region 5. Region 3 really hasn't had them. In fact, it was our understanding that they were discouraged in the beginning. We think they should be encouraged. This ratio here of applied nitrogen versus removed, like why didn't we include reporting distribution uniformity of irrigation water and irrigation water applied? Well, it all falls out with this number. If you're putting on a lot more water than you need, you end up having to put on more nitrogen than you need. How's that? You don't need to know all the details. A management plan would consider those details, but not reporting.
Is that, I think I know why that is. Is that because if you overwater, the nitrogen's going to go past the
Yep.
root zone and not do you any good?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
So it shows up in this ratio in the end. You know, it gets back to how many of those arrows do you really need to know? Now, for management, you need to know that sort of thing. See, there's no question about it. But for reporting, for you guys to really know what's going on, that's in the weeds. Basically, you need to know how much of what's applied is being used. The remainder is what's going in the groundwater, see?
Eventually.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to operationalize this in terms
Yeah.
of what would happen. So if somebody saw, and we talked about this as we were going through the Region 3 appeal petition, if all of a sudden you saw someone who was adding a lot more nitrogen to their crop than somebody else similarly situated, questions would arise. One assumption might be they must be using more water too if they have to keep putting that nitrogen on, because if they piled that much nitrogen on without putting more water on, they'd destroy their crop.
Yeah, now, first of all, just nitrogen, it depends on the crop, of course.
Right.
Yeah, so grapevines don't get as much nitrogen as produce crops.
Right.
But,
We heard
yeah,
that a lot.
the thing is we don't even know those numbers right now. We don't know, and we don't even know what these attainable and realistic ratios are. Some people want lots of action right away, but you know, this takes years to develop. Farmers don't even think this way right now. This is like a major step. Farmers think, in fact, the recommendations for nitrogen are to avoid any deficit, and you look at petiole analysis now. This type of a thing is not even on the horizon for many people. Not that it shouldn't be, but there's been no need to think in these terms historically. It's been for production.
Right.
So this is a major shift in I don't want to make this trivial at all. This is a major shift in thinking for people.
So could along those lines, I can't help but think of the CDFA task force, and it seems that, well, just for example on water, you're suggesting that it be part of the plan, but not part of reporting.
Right.
But you're going to be able to tell through that ratio anyway.
That's right.
And we don't really know what those ratios should be. In some cases we do, but where we don't, and I'm picturing that triangle, where we don't, on the outside of the triangle that the CDFA task force recommends, is that constant flow of, or loop back on research. So the research is ongoing where we already know, say for almonds, we have a pretty good idea, but where we don't, say vegetable row crops, as that research develops, that'll fold back in through the management plans, through the CCAs or, you know, the advisors, to eventually hone in on management practices so that the ratio can tighten up.
Yes, that's exactly right. I want to emphasize well, I'll get to it in a minute here. Yes, that's the idea. The idea is, you know, we have the general idea. I mean, everybody's got the idea. You put stuff on, you harvest it, the remainder goes down the tubes. I mean, that's basically it. But there are a lot of details we don't really know, and we could get into that. But yes, you hit it right on.
And, yeah, and along those lines, I mean, we're searching for through this effort, as you note, the accountability mechanism. But we do want it to be arrived at, patiently, carefully. But do you see then this eventually can be a voluntary type performance standard for a coalition around certain crops, based on 5-10 years of experience? I mean, is that where this ends up, in terms of tracking and accountability down the road?
The question of voluntary is an interesting one. For example, we're not suggesting at all that that the management plans be voluntary. We're saying they should be required. Not just required, but a good management plan be required, and that's why you need the educational efforts in that. Now, in terms of what a good ratio is, this AR ratio, and what should be expected, we really don't know yet, and we didn't really, we have our hunches. you know, but we weren't ready to go that far yet because the numbers you mentioned, like 10 years, probably. That really is what it is. Or we could just send the troops in right now.
Yeah, well, you know how it is. I mean, in California, it's hard to come up with anything after a couple of years because the hydrology is so variable, you know, so.
Yeah,
That's
long
why we
term,
say
though,
things
this
like
should,
10 years.
right, things go up and down. You don't put your star on 1 year. It takes multiple years tracking, but we think this is the way to go. And not guess by doing indirect things. Okay. So anyway, they must develop good and implement good irrigation and nitrogen management plans. And, you know, the only way to really handle this, we think, is with the coalitions. In other words, the state board does not have the staff, the resources, or anything else, and they don't have their boots on the ground, you know, at the level that's needed for this. And then there's this outreach thing, and, pardon?
I know. Well, I turned it on, now the little light went red
It
again.
expires after
Yeah,
6
sorry.
p.m.
This is my
Oh.
leash. I have a leash. So that made me forget what my point was. Darn it. But your point is just that farmers talking to farmers is going to get a lot further, even if we had the resources, right? Or just that this is the fastest way to disseminate knowledge effectively.
Let's see.
Yeah, boots on the ground.
With coalitions,
Yeah.
But also
I'm
there-
a fan of coalitions in every field, just so you know.
yeah. Yeah, part of it's local organization because every area is a little different. Part of it is some things don't make a whole lot of difference. This is my personal opinion, that some things don't make a whole lot of difference sometimes, but if the farmers really think they're involved in it, they'll go along with it, and maybe it didn't make much difference
It's a
anyway.
social, cultural
You know,
thing in addition.
and,
All right.
and, I mean, attitude's a whole lot. And, but then also they'll be able, yeah, we do think that they will share their information locally. And any of you have anything you want to put in? Mark, you want to put something in?
I think the same thing probably was said about the dairy program when it started, and now look at the membership you have.
Right. That's why we started.
Okay. I'm going longer than I wanted to on this, but probably than you wanted to, but here we go.
No, it's good.
Okay. One of the problems we have right now is there are not enough qualified consultants or individual farmers to develop the plans. I mean, it's really a reality. Like the Certified Crop Advisor group, they, you know, a lot of the guys, they don't really have any irrigation training per se. It's more the agronomic stuff, and it's really this combination. So there needs to be a strong educational effort, and we address in the report a variety of ways to do it. It's not just extension, UC extension, but it's other things too. And anyway, I'll move on here. We listed critical components that need to be covered in education, and you know, there's a list here, and it's described in the report. Now, here's kind of an important thing here. Previous reports have suggested BMPs, and we're not really hot on that, and personally I'm not hot on it at all, because I've seen all those lists, you know, that things to do, and it's a checkoff list, and I don't really think they do much good. And that's the idea of this management plan, not just check off boxes, but customize what you need to do for a particular situation. So, so rather than having a list of BMPs, best management practices, that you check off that can be really fairly meaningless. I mean, these things go, I could make lists of hundreds of items just related to irrigation that would be fairly meaningless, but would look good, you know. So we would have this creation of the plans, awareness program, implementation, and then internal review and assessment of the impacts, and that would be on farm, and that's where the coalitions would also come in, saying, look at, here's maybe, for example, here's this metric, here's how you are compared to other guys in the area. So,
Yeah, the behavioral
yeah,
aspect of it.
keep in mind that it's going to take some time for coalitions to get organized in some of these areas, and just to develop the procedure, the organizational process to get these management plans going. This isn't going to happen overnight. And so although we sense an urgency in doing something, we sense an urgency in doing it correctly. How's that? So, again, the plan details are for management, not reporting, but of course they'd be subject to audit and they'd have to be updated annually.
Can I add one?
Yeah, you bet, Robert.
In this type of discussion, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with the concept in general of BMPs. I think a lot of the pieces of the nitrogen management and the water management plans are going to be select items within those that are most appropriate.
Okay.
That are most appropriate. So, you know, it isn't that we're making a statement against the concept of BMPs or that those aren't a lot of the different type of things that could be implemented. It's just that it's going to be tailored and it's part of a nitrogen management and water management plan, rather than just, like Charles said, checking off a
Checklist.
list to
Yeah.
say that we implemented 5 of these or 10 out of column B. So
So who is going to put these plans together?
That's what we have, that's part of this educational effort, and there's a whole question of how you would
Who's
certify
going to
people.
educate these folks
Well, that's what we
that
have.
are going
in-
to educate other folks?
Yeah, that's right. And for example, the UC has had a couple of seminars, but that's only one approach. And so obviously you're talking to the guy with Irrigation Training and Research Center. But there are many different approaches that need to be considered, and the coalitions have to be in the driver's seat on it too, you know. So, yeah, it's a serious question. And really, if you want to get that's the thing, there's not a Band-Aid for this. It's a long-term, long-haul deal, and if you really want to be serious about it, somebody's going to have to put the money in for a serious, sustained, high-quality educational effort targeting different audiences. That's what it's going to take, rather than just a hammer approach. That's what we think, anyway. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. We didn't define exactly who would do exactly what. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm like reading, I'm getting facial agreements or different things.
Okay. Or disagreements, yeah.
And volunteers.
I guess the only thing I thought was really interesting earlier in the day was to hear Deanne Meyer's comment. We were talking about this during one of the breaks, her comment that they have developed and delivered workshop type of approaches that are, you know, fairly extensive, but the part that caught my attention was her statement that they collect questions and make adjustments based on what seem to be the hot topics or the items that come up, you know, during the course of the year that may mean that it's not a static educational approach, it's something that's
Absolutely.
evolving. So
Absolutely.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, we get in.
Organic, if you will.
Yeah. Like, you know, our center puts on about 60 short courses a year, to give you an idea, and I helped develop a certification program for the Irrigation Association. So there's a lot of different angles on it. You know, I mean, there are different ways to do things that you hit different audiences, but we did not answer that question.
I guess one of the things that I'm struggling with here, and I really appreciate what you've done, and it makes every kind of sense, but right at the very, very, very beginning, you said, let's not make this more complex than it is.
Yeah.
And when you start talking education, it gets complex real fast. Because, like, what are you going to, you know, who's going to put the curriculum together? Who's going to do the teaching? Who's going to, you know, so I just want to underscore that what I'm hearing is while the monitoring, you may be making a very cogent recommendation that we not focus on monitoring when it's really not necessary, but we are quickly going into complexity when we start talking about using education and planning as the mechanism for eventually creating change.
You're right. It's the thing is what we clearly identified early on is that there were a lot of complex modeling and ways to go that we thought would get you nowhere. And we're saying, yes, this is a complex thing, but the organization of the training programs and the design of them is not going to put us an onerous burden. Was that the word that was used earlier? Yeah, anyway.
Which,
That Paul was using, anyway.
scurrilous.
Scurrilous, right.
Scurrilous or.
Scurrilous, and you can strike that from in record, but anyway, it will not put a scurrilous
I just
burden on
disagree.
farmers in terms of collecting data and reporting, so yes, nothing perfect.
No, so the trick for us from a public policy standpoint, assuming we were trying to operationalize
Yeah.
what you say, is what's the leverage and/or support or incentives to get to that place?
I think so, yeah. It's after 6, so I'm not sure. Okay. So the recommendation.
Charles, can I chime in here for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm very happy that you asked this question because I think many people underestimated
Yeah.
really the significance of one bullet point. If there's one general thing that I'd really like to emphasize, the final report has a lot of bullet points in there, and sometimes it may seem, oh, it's just another bullet point, but a lot of those just little bullet points carry a lot of meaning, and they're very momentous in the change that we're recommending to go forth. This educational training certification program that we're recommending, we did not put timelines or financial magnitudes on it. My own personal opinion is it'll be multi-million annual budgets for many years. And you're right, it will be a huge effort, but on the good side, we're also telling you where money can be saved and where not to spend resources. This is truly the effort that we think needs to happen if we're serious about reducing nitrate loads to groundwater. And as we were writing this together, we were aware of the fact that we will make many people unhappy of both ends of the spectrum. So we're like in our document, we are saying there needs to be certification programs to make sure that people get the message and can deliver advice to farmers that they need to get, for example. So.
Thank you.
And actually, it's all right, I mean, certification, you can see it even in today, what pride people take personally in achieving certification and coming to a public forum and being proud of that accomplishment. And so what you're tapping into is a powerful human force, and so it's hard to, then reconcile that with a regulatory program. But we need to humanize our program in these ways. So I appreciate your comment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that makes us different. See, anyway, okay. The data that's going to be reported, location of farming unit. Now, you may hear testimony, we heard testimony that that was a major effort for one of the coalitions to even somehow communicate to farmers where their unit was. How's that? I mean, these things don't just happen. Anyway, the crop, the acreage, nitrogen applications, synthetic and natural and all that, and then how much is removed or sequestered. By the way, the sequestered thing just means that, you're growing trees, it goes into the wood. That's. And so on verification and monitoring, we are focusing on the source control. What progress is being made on source control. Otherwise, you're just looking at it after the fact. And then you can use those for long-term trend analysis. And of course, you do, just as a regulatory agency, you do need to be monitoring groundwater nitrate concentrations as you have in the past. Targeted research. We've heard a variety of people say that, well, we need research on good irrigation methods. We don't think so. There have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of demonstrations on that. People may not know about it, but it's there. But what we do need is things like we need better information on crop nitrogen uptake rates and timing for some crops. We need to know how much nitrogen is removed by crops. We need to know even how to sample that. And should you take one sample for every carton? Should you take one for every truck? Things like that, and the sampling intervals. So there's some basic stuff even on reporting the data correctly. Finally, this is the last slide, is surface water discharges. You can tell the emphasis was groundwater. Individual field monitoring is very problematic, and we think coalitions are good again. And rather than looking at discharge points, we thought about this long and hard, and we think what you do is you get in the receiving waters and then you work upstream if you notice a problem, rather than just going out to all of the fields and having to sample. And we did not have any uniform sampling density and frequency recommendations because they depend on the size and complexity of the watershed and what you find with sampling. I mean, if you go out on a larger scale and don't find anything, there's no reason to go back in and take hundreds of measurements. If you start finding things, then you have to narrow the path, figure out where this stuff is coming from.
Question, so
Yes.
you're saying monitor the receiving water, but then presumably if you found something, you would go
You'd go upstream.
upstream? All
That's
You're
right.
not just saying just monitor the receiving water and never monitor a discharge point. You're saying start with the receiving waters and monitor discharge points where you see a problem?
You'd go on the receiving water, and the idea that we had is you'd eventually find the place that's the culprit.
Yeah, and I think the idea was you wouldn't just have individuals doing surface water willy-nilly. You would do it in a
That's right.
concerted effort to
That's right.
assess that water body at a organized period of time.
That's right. You would, that's right. You would have a network. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a term in swamp, or I don't know if it's still used, but snapshot monitoring. Where spatially, do a kind of a blitzkrieg. Do a well thought out, confluence based, but receiving water snapshot monitoring, and then you get that picture in time as opposed to stretching it out over a season or that sort of thing. Then you have more diagnostic
Yeah.
ability when you do a snapshot approach.
Rather than requiring
You have to
every.
do it at some frequency
Yeah.
because the cropping patterns change so much in some areas, other places no.
And we did not get into the details on that. What we were saying is that's the way to do it rather than requiring discharge monitoring on every field. In other words, yeah. And the other four are willing to take your questions.
What about Darren?
Great. I've been asking mine as we go. Do other people have questions? I'm mindful of the time. This is interesting. We're not making a decision today. We're just able to take it in and talk about it. People can hear. So unless there's a question right now, you're not going to go anywhere, are you?
No, and I'm sure certainly myself and the others on the panel would be more than willing to try to answer questions if you have them later on at a later date.
Terrific. And this won't be our only opportunity, and we'll have opportunities. We'll find other opportunities.
I think there is a staff recommendation, though. Is that right, Tom, John? To receive the report. I'm just reading the item here.
All right. So that is
So,
action. Thank you
is
for
it-
that. Right. All right.
Well, I have a suggestion, but you have cards, right?
I have cards.
Yeah, I'll just wait until
Okay.
hearing from folks.
You did fill out a card, or someone filled one out for you, and I put it at the top of the pile.
Because I was doing this in the back of the room.
You've been jumping out of your chair.
I know, and I am very mindful of that, Mr. Thomas. Thank you very much. Karen Ross, Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And there's a couple things I do want to do. And one is to remind this board that we have a memorandum of understanding, and this is a perfect example of how we can really collaborate to achieve some of the recommendations of this report. But first, I want to thank Darren and his staff for getting this all organized, and all the members of the expert panel, because this has been done on a fairly quick timeline, now that I've been in government long enough to know what was
this was actually pretty
pre-government. And we experienced the same thing, and I think that this is very complementary with the nitrogen reporting and tracking report that we did last year. But what I really wanted to emphasize here is what we have done and our commitment to what we want to do on the education, outreach, research, and piece of this. One is that last year we worked in another very short time frame to create a curriculum for training for crop advisors, training and certification, with ongoing education for that. And in a very short period of time, starting like last fall, we used a lot of time from people at the universities and with coalitions and commodity groups, and put that training into place. And we trained 500 crop advisors last year, and our target is 300 more this year. Concurrently, we're also working with grower groups and the coalitions and the universities so that we can create a curriculum for certification for growers to do the same kind of education with ongoing educational hours. It's very similar to what many of them want to do with regard to the application of pesticides on their own properties. They have to go through education, and there's a requirement for ongoing education, and they have to go in and take a test and do the licensing for that. So there's precedent for doing that and putting that out into the field, and we are very committed to having that ready to go in 2015. The coalitions are one of many ways of getting the word out, including some commodity groups. The good thing about a state like California is that we have 400 commodities, but not all commodities are organized as well or funded as equally as others. So we also have great commodity programs that are already in place. I think a lot of the work from this will better inform our research proposals. Over the last 20 years, we've funded over $12 million worth of research that has been useful to this program, and we really want to be very targeted and strategic in what we're doing, and that's our commitment to you. And I want to add that our commitment to being able to do this, to fund pilots, which oftentimes are a great way of demonstrating to growers within an area what to do. We have just recently, is it finalized, Amadou? An increase to our mill assessment to help us fund even more research targeted to these kinds of programs and the education and outreach to help farmers and ranchers to continue to be successful in growing food and taking care of our environment. So thank you very much.
That's great, thank you. Thank you. You can raise your hand and come back anytime you want through the closing.
Your meetings are so fun, I really
Next, Pamela Creedon, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Water Board. And just, you know, I have a number of cards we're going to go through. We had one request from one group to have an expert come speak, and we allotted them 15 minutes. They're kind of late in the queue, but there'll be one longer one. Everyone else will be 3 minutes because they asked in advance.
Thank you. And I would like to, if I could ask if Clay Rogers could follow me. He put in a card, and thank you very much. He'll add on to that. So thank you. I'm Pamela Creedon. You know me, Executive Officer of Central Valley Water Board. But we submitted a comment letter, and we highlighted a number of things in the report that we liked. And I'm not going to focus on those for the sake of time. I'll hurry up through the things that we have still maintained major concerns over. And there are many things in here, and I agree with him that we should make things simple. In the report, they make a few quotes about precision and accuracy and all this other stuff, but you know, there's one that says, Einstein said, you should make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think in a certain degree, some of what the recommendations are good, but I think they've made it too simple for us to do our charge. And so I'd just like to highlight those. Part of it is some reporting requirements, the fact that they wanted what they proposed to report to the boards in terms of nitrogen applied and nitrogen removed. Those are good things. Irrigation management are good, but you know, we're in an adaptive management type program where we have some severe problems with our groundwater that we know, and by their own acknowledgement, there's ag as a contributor. And we have a long-term program. And they're suggesting that we implement these measures and not have any real strong reporting that will help us to see if there's any level of effort or what they're doing on the ground today to address some of the issues. And so we have asked for BMPs to be reported to the board. We've asked for the growers to report this information to us. We find it, you know, when you have a permit that doesn't have a limit in it or a threshold that they must meet, or anything where it's just, let's see how it works and we'll adjust as we learn more, we do need some level of something for us to demonstrate that we have some level of effort going forth, that they're moving forward to meet their obligations and our regulations. Without that, it's useless for us. So we do emphasize, I see they think it's useless and it's just going to be used for enforcement. You know, it's not going to be used for just enforcement, but it is going to inform us and the public that we're obligated to demonstrate that our rules are actually working, that there's some level of effort on the part of the growers. They've also, in the report, pretty much tossed out the vulnerability concept that we have. In the Central Valley, we have over 7 million acres of ag land, over 30,000 growers. The cost is going to be enormous of this program. We're trying to find a way to help focus our efforts, both through the coalitions and the growers, through our actions, and to the growers themselves. We've had 2 coalitions who have successfully developed vulnerability areas, the Rice Coalition and the Eastside Coalition. It's not perfect. It'll be improved upon as we move along. But it's...
Keep going a little.
But it's been done. And it's going to be a useful tool for us and the coalitions as we move forward. We're working with them, and we use that as a tool so that they're not trying to do everything everywhere, but we have a focus for us to look at and work with them on to see if we can't minimize the cost. This is going to be a tremendous cost. We do require that everyone implement management for nutrient. We require everyone to report BMPs. We require everyone to participate, but we require more of those that are in these higher vulnerable areas so that we can start focusing on seeing how we can get the improvements. The other part that we really have a strong disagreement with is this monitoring concept. We do have a court case that was judged against us in our dairy order where Judge Roby wrote the decision, and it was very clear we could not rely simply on trend monitoring in order for us to meet our charge. And here they're suggesting that that's just what we do. I understand this is going to take a long time. I understand we're not going to be able to develop numbers and the complexity of it all. But we, as a board, have been very successful at developing monitoring programs to remove noises, to try to address the complexities as much as possible. We do monitor. We do have our waste discharges that are applied to land, so it's diffuse. And we do create monitoring programs around that can tell us information and inform us as how well our regulations are performing and how well our discharges are doing. We understand that trying to do it on every farm and every field is impossible. It's so expensive you couldn't even start. So we're looking for some guidance on we recommended a particular program for best management implementation, evaluation, assessment. We have something similar in the dairy program. They've been moving forward for the last 2 years with the dairy program to do this for us. It seems to be successful. We still have some complexities and issues to deal with, but it's giving us invaluable information. And for them to say we shouldn't do this because it's so difficult and we'll just monitor how much they apply and how much they remove and see how well they do over time, and maybe in the next 50 years we'll figure out if there's been improvement, we're just asking for the legacy issue to continue. And I don't think my board would agree with that approach at all. And then lastly, and Clay will speak to the monitoring. But I guess that's really all my points I wanted to make. Let me make sure. Yeah, that's it. I'll leave it to Clay. Clay's going to speak a little more to the more monitoring and the more technical aspects of our concerns.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
While they're getting the PowerPoint out.
I don't believe we ever said anything about 50 years. And I also don't, we were very explicit that the monitoring would involve these ratios, which are actually at the source. In other words, those would be reported values. If that isn't monitoring, I'm not sure what it is. It's not a proxy measurement. It's not something that involves lag time. It's the actual values that are going on that year. That's in fact, that's right at the heart of it. No extrapolation.
Oh, Dr. Bird, do you have the clicker?
If there's time, I would like to say something too.
Sure.
So in response to what Pamela just said, I very much understand the regional board's concerns, and we knew that we were, with our recommendations, we knew that those concerns would be there. Fundamentally, I think, and this is my personal opinion, this is not consensus opinion of this panel, but I think the regional boards are literally overtasked with the tools that they have at their disposal to protect groundwater quality from agricultural discharges to groundwater. And the reason for that is the following. Historically, with all the examples that Pamela just gave, they've been relying on groundwater monitoring of the monitoring of first encountered groundwater. I am a groundwater hydrologist. I'm the technical program manager for the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program, and we monitor first encounter groundwater. I've been the one who designed the program, all the monitoring wells, and coordinate all the monitoring. There are big technical limitations in what this data can give you, and this is explained in detail in this report. I know it sounds shocking when Charles just gives you the bullet point and says, hey, we're not recommending monitoring of first encountered groundwater. There's a lot of rationale behind it. But for a regional board, it's terrible, because their #1 tool that has worked beautifully with regulating point source dischargers and maybe some other diffuse sources too is fundamentally doesn't have the same utility in most hydrologic systems in the Central Valley. So then the next best thing, I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time here, but this is important. The next best thing then is this application removal ratio. And while that is, we think it's very valuable, it still presents a problem to a regulator, because it does not give a sort of trigger that can tell you precisely you're out of compliance or you're not out of compliance. Because there will always be debate over, well, if I'm growing lettuce or broccoli, should the AR ratio be 1.4 or 1.25 or 0.2, whatever it might be, there's ranges. And so it still doesn't give that black and white tool that can tell you with certainty, this is a violation, this is not a violation. So I understand Pamela's concerns, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Clay on groundwater monitoring in specific. It is just the nature of the beast. We were tasked with giving you technically based opinions. And this, in effect, I'm very happy about this, because we were free of considerations of legal aspects, regulatory, administrative, financial. It's just the technical nature of the beast.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, we appreciate it, and we don't expect you to design a regulatory scheme. We wanted your best advice, and then we have to struggle with that.
That's Clay's job.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Marcus, members of the board. I'm Clay Rogers again, Assistant Executive Officer with the Central Valley Water Board. And I'm here today to talk about just a couple issues that we have, that I have with the report. I do want to say that we appreciate very much the work that the panel put into this. We certainly fully support most of the recommendations that they made. There are great things about water use, because it is water that transports the nitrates. You know, so there are issues like that certainly are very beneficial. We appreciate that. The AR ratio, and I'll talk about that a little bit, we like, but we are a little bit concerned about the groundwater monitoring. The panel concluded that monitoring of first encountered groundwater, such as proposed in our management practice evaluation program for irrigated lands, and is also being done by our representative monitoring program for our dairy program, is of little to no value. And they go on to say that that's because it's problematic, it's inexpensive, and it's inconclusive. This is based on the conclusion that there are too many complexities, such as changing cropping patterns, vadose zone lag times, and aquifer complexities, to provide a reliable correlation between what is occurring at the surface and in groundwater. Our programs, again, such as the Representative Monitoring Program and the Management Practice Evaluation Program, are based on limited monitoring of representative sites that are carefully chosen to limit these complexities. These data are needed to confirm the performance of management practices being implemented and verify compliance with the receiving water standards. Because again, we don't have a standard for AR ratio. We don't have a set number. Ultimately, our